Acharya Saraswati Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, Verse 3. Ajaiva Rajam Balam Riddha Kosham Prakopita Brahma Kulanulame Dahatpa Bhadrasya Punarname Bud Papiyasi Dear Dvija Deva Gobhya Adya, this day, Eva, on the very, Rajam, kingdom, Balamruddha, strength and riches, Kosham, treasury, Kopita, ignited by Brahmakula, by the Brahmana community, Anula, fire, may, Dahutu, let it burn me, Abhadrasya, inauspicious, Puna, again, not, may, unto me, Abut, may occur, Papiyasi, sinful, D, intelligence, Vija, Brahmanas, Deva, Supreme Lord, Gobhya, and the cows. Translation: I'm uncivilized and sinful due to my neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection. Therefore, I wish that my kingdom, strength, and riches burn up immediately by the fire of the Brahmana's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. Progressive human civilization is based on Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and protection of cows. All economic development of the state by trade, commerce, agriculture, and industries must be fully utilized in relation to the above principles. Otherwise, all so-called economic development becomes a source of degradation. Cow protection means feeding the Brahminical culture, which leads towards God consciousness, and thus perfection of human civilization is achieved. The age of Kali aims at killing the higher principles of life. And although Maharaj Parikshit strongly resisted the domination of the personality of Kali within this world, the influence of the age of Kali came at an opportune moment, and even a strong king like Maharaj Parikshit was induced to disregard the Brahminical culture due to a slight provocation of hunger and thirst. Maharaj Parikshit lamented the accidental incident, and he desired that all his kingdom strength and accumulation of wealth would be burned up for not being engaged in Brahminical culture, etc. Where wealth and strength are not engaged in the advancement of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, the state and home are surely doomed by providence. If we want peace and prosperity in the world, we should take lessons from this verse. Every state and every home must endeavor to advance the cause of Brahminical culture for self-purification, God consciousness for self-realization, and cow protection for getting sufficient milk and the best food to continue a perfect civilization. Translation: I'm uncivilized and sinful due to my neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection. Therefore, I wish that my kingdom, strength, and riches burn up immediately by the fire of the Brahmana's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. So here we see that the king, repenting for his action, desires that his position, his power, his possessions all get destroyed, so that he will not commit such an offense again. In other words, that it means that the kingdom and its riches and its position, etc., give rise to impurity and pride, etc. And this is the cause of his making this mistake. Of course, we can say that in general, material desires will impel us to do sinful activities or make mistakes. And these sinful activities are incited by temptation of or attachment to material objects. And if we're attached to our objects, as a king may be, then he can give rise to pride, and pride can give rise to anger. Anger can give rise to rash acts or sinful activities. In this case, we can say the king was afflicted by hunger and thirst because of his position and his pride, etc. He got angry due to that when the Brahmana did not respect him. So we can say the pride was due to the anger was due to the pride, and the pride was due to his identity with his position. So from a material point of view, we can analyze it in that way. And this is how Parikshit analyzes his situation. In other words, he takes himself as a normal human being. And we'll see that this is exactly what is said in Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, that because we do have attachment to material objects, this gives rise to anger if we get frustrated, and consequently we do all sorts of unintelligent acts in this world, and we destroy ourselves in that way. So therefore, Parikshit prays that let me get rid of all of this wealth and all these problems, so I won't have any attachment, I won't have any pride, and therefore I won't commit such a mistake again. So it's a very good way of analyzing his own situation. This, of course, is from a humble point of view, that the Parikshit is just an ordinary human being. Nevertheless, the devotees feel like this. Even if they are very elevated, they have this attitude that they have a material body, they have a mind with wild senses, and they're suffering due to the miserable anarthas that they have. And therefore they pray to the Lord that please take all of this false identity away, take away all my wealth, etc., so that I can become a better devotee. So that's the very nature of a devotee. And that doesn't only apply in the material world. We see even the exalted devotees in the spiritual world, or the eternal associates of the Lord, also pray in the same way, even though they don't have material bodies and they don't have material attachments at all. They say, I'm the most miserable because I've got so many bad faults and anarthas, so therefore you please help me and save me from this situation. I'm suffering in samsara, etc. So it's an attitude of the devotee. But because of that, we shouldn't say, therefore, the Parikshit is full of faults, and look at him, if he is admitting he's faulty, therefore we should not condemn him for this. So this is an expression, again, of his nature of a devotee. Ultimately, he doesn't really identify with his body at all, or as being a king. He's an eternal associate of the Lord. So, but from another point of view, he sets a good example for people in the material world by giving this nice example. So he has proper understanding. So here, he mentions three things in particular. That is Dvijas, Devas, and cows. So Dvijas, of course, means second born. Technically, of course, it will apply to the three upper castes because they're all Dvija. They all get the Brahma Gayatri mantra. They're all qualified to study the Vedas, so that's their second birth. So the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, as well as the Brahmanas, are all called Dvijas. But we often see the word Dvija refers to the Brahmana because he's the highest of those Dvijas. So we say Dvija, and it means Brahmana. So the Brahmanas are there, and the Deva, of course, is the Supreme Lord. and go as the cows. So these are very, very important, and if we neglect these, then there's a problem for everyone. So it is particularly the duty of the king to make sure that the Brahmana is protected, the cow is protected, and the Supreme Lord is worshipped. So we can ask, well, why these three? Why not protect the Sudras and the Kshatriyas also? Everybody should be protected. Why the Brahmana gets the most emphasis here? Why the cows? But we see that this is quite, let's say, accurate in one sense. In the very last line of this purport, then Prabhupada talks about this. Why we need the Brahmana, why we need the Lord, why we need the cow. So the Brahminical culture is there for purification. So we have to purify ourselves. And the Brahmanas are sattvic in nature, they have knowledge of the scriptures, they conduct themselves properly, and they impart purity to the rest of society by their instructions. So they advise the king, and they do all the ceremonies for the population. We see, for instance, when the people of Vrindavan, Nanda Maharaj, the birth ceremony, for instance, and what does he do? He calls the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas start chanting mantras, Krishna's birth, and make it all auspicious or whatever. Yeah. Or when Mother Yasoda sees in Krishna's mouth the universe, then she gets very surprised by that. And then she wonders, well, maybe, what is this? What's happening? Maybe some demons are attacking or something and causing this problem for Krishna or me or whatever. I don't know what's happening. So she calls the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas chant mantras to protect Krishna. The Brahmanas act, and of course when we find that Krishna and Balaram get their names, Garga Muni, Brahmana, he's invited there, and then he gives them their names and whatever like that. So the society depends upon the Brahmana doing certain ceremonies for them, giving blessings, purifying, etc. So it's an essential part of the society for carrying out these functions. He acts as their priest and their guardian and their mentor, etc. And for the Kshatriya particularly, the king, then he is their advisor. And the king must take advice from him. And this is in regard, of course, to operating the kingdom, etc., according to Dharma. So, I previously mentioned that the whole Varnashram system and the rules of Dharma have the goal of purification. Try to raise the people above their anartas, to raise the person in tamagun to rajagun, rajagun to sattvagun. So this is a process of purification. So all of these rules of that system are for purification of the person, which we can say is purification of the subtle body, etc. So the Brahman is responsible for that. He himself is on the highest level, that is sattva, so therefore he can guide others to come up to that level. So very important that there is some purification and an attempt to raise the people from tamas to sattva in the material world. And the Brahmana is essential for that. So therefore the Brahminical community has to be protected. So that is one of the duties of the king. He has to respect the Brahmana, support them in all ways, and encourage them, follow their advice, etc. And with that, if he does that, then the kingdom goes on nicely, and people go through this, we say, mental purification or whatever. So that's one thing, purification. Then we have the cow. What's the purpose of the cow? So we often hear that the cow is there because the cow gives milk and yogurt and ghee for the nourishment of the human being. So that's one function, which means the physical function. that it helps support the physical body of the human being in a sattvic way. So the cow is beneficial for the human's physical well-being. It helps to purify him and bring him up to a higher level. But the other aspect, of course, of the cow is that with the ghee, the brahmanas perform the sacrifices. And the sacrifices are essential. So we see in Bhagavad Gita that in the 3rd chapter there, Krishna talks about the chakra, the cycle that goes on. The human beings follow the Vedas, and according to that, then they do sacrifice. And as a result of sacrifice, they worship the devatas, including Indra. As a result of that, Indra gives rain in the proper amount, not too much, not too little. And when you get the proper rain, then the crops go very nicely. When the crops go nicely, the human being can harvest those. Then they can do sacrifice, offer the result, and then nourish his body, follow the Vedas again, and then do more sacrifice and get more rain. So, in other words, the sacrifice is very, very necessary. So, one of the important elements of the sacrifice is the ghee. You need that ghee to carry out the sacrifice. So therefore, the cow is related to the act of sacrifice that the Brahman does in order to connect that cycle so that we get material prosperity in this world. So in this way, the cow is related not only to nourishment of our physical body, but it's also related to the whole cycle by which we get our nourishment in this world. And if cow's not there, then it fails. So we could say, well, we just have grains and offer the grains to the Lord and give them that. But the cow is important because the ghee has to be there in the sacrifice also. And therefore, the cycle works nicely. And we get our physical well-being, etc. Of course, the other aspect of the milk is that it's good for the brain. The milk products are good for the brain, and they give us sattvic intelligence instead of tamasic or rajasic intelligence. So that's another aspect, that it helps raise the consciousness of the human being upwards. It's not only a physical effect, but we say the mental effect as well. So it nourishes the body physically, so you stay strong and healthy. Secondly is it affects your mind, so that you end up with higher thoughts, sattvic thoughts, rather than tamasic thoughts. So very, very important for society. Of course, we have the theory now that you shouldn't take any animal products, etc., like that. It's also a modern theory, but we see here that the Vedas particularly keep mentioning the cow all the time. You got to protect the cow. Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha, we say in our prayer. The Lord takes care of the brahmanas and the cows. So Krishna also takes care of the cows. And of course, Krishna herds the cows also. So, very, very prominent in the Bhagavatam, the cows. And of course, we have the Govardhana Leela, where the cows get emphasized and worshipped again. And then Govardhan is worshipped because it gives nourishment to the cows. Govardhan means to nourish the cows. So Govardhan is worshipable because it gives nice grass to the cows, nice water to the cows. So because then the cows give nice milk and ghee, and therefore Nanda Maharaj becomes very wealthy. So therefore the cow is emphasized an awful lot. And essential for the sacrifice, essential for the food, for sattvic quality to arise. So very important. Of course, we may question, modern, we can question why like that, whatever. It's just like, why is Shankha pure? Why is cow dung pure? Because it's, they're bone and stool, so wow, how can it be pure? But then, because the Vedas say so, we accept it. So similarly, we can also accept it. Why the cow? Why cow milk? Why like this? But Veda says like that, so we accept it as a higher truth. Now we can go backwards and trying to analyze, and then we can take the cow dung and analyze its chemical components and see that it's antiseptic or something like that, or whatever. So similarly, we can take the cow milk and you can kind of analyze it and see its physical effects on the human being and its effects on the brain, etc. Possibly we could do that, and then you would get a scientific reason also. But if we have respect for the Vedic literature, then we simply follow the principle. We don't question too much, that's all. But there has to be a good reason behind it. And so therefore the cow is emphasized in the milk, and milk products are emphasized in the Vedic literature. So the third component is deva, which is a general term that can refer to devatas in general, and it can also refer to the Supreme Lord. The word deva itself comes from the root div. Most of the nouns or substantives in Sanskrit come from verb forms, like asva, from as, and asu means to go quickly. So horse is an animal that moves quickly, like that. So the deva, the root is div, and div means to shine or to play. So in heavenly planets, the devatas are playing around a lot. They get a lot of enjoyment. So they're called devas for that reason. And the other, of course, Krishna plays. He has pastimes. Pastimes means playing in spiritual world. And the other is div means to shine. So in other words, the devatas are very effulgent compared to the human beings. And of course, the Supreme Lord is the most effulgent of all. So in other words, very beautiful and very effulgent, have this aura around them like that. So therefore, deva can refer to devatas, but then it can also refer to Supreme Lord, Supreme Shining Person, the Supreme Person who is playing, etc. So that respect and worship of the Lord is also important. So, in other words, the system is not complete just with maintaining the physical bodies of people and making sure that they're more sattvic than tamasic, and that they're peaceful. You have to do more than that. So therefore, the deva is there. You also have to worship the Lord. Of course, you can say, well, it means devatas also. So even that is a step towards worshiping Supreme Lord. Why do the Vedas talk about devata worship at all? Why not just say worship only Krishna or Vishnu, finished? And then we don't have this problem with all these other temples there. But the Vedas have a large section, Karma Kanda, dedicated to worshiping devatas to get material results. And in Bhagavad Gita, there's a whole chapter 3 in which Krishna encourages Arjuna to worship devatas. And by worshiping devatas, you can live nicely in this world. So why we have to have them at all? And why worship them? Well, they're necessary in the material world because the Supreme Lord has servants to do things. He doesn't do things directly. So to handle the material world, to handle the rain and the sun and the heat and the cold and the whatever, all these different operations in the material world, the Lord has the devatas from Brahma down to Indra and others, and then upadevatas in charge of the trees and whatever in this material world to make sure it functions properly and to help support the human beings. So they are servants of the Supreme Lord. And people, if they worship the devatas, at least they are acknowledging higher authority. So in that sense, we don't criticize the worship of the devatas if it is done according to Scripture. At least they're acknowledging higher authority and that we are not independent. We can just take the food and eat it and destroy the earth. There's some other person up there and we've got to give respect to that other person. So that's what the devatas are there for on a lower level. And we'll see in all cultures of the world, usually they do have these spirits or devatas around, and they understand that we're not supposed to interfere too much with this world, and there's some other powers above us that are also controlling us, but they're not quite sure who they are or whatever. They think they're a mountain or a tree or a river or spirit or whatever like that. But they give respect to it. And that helps preserve the, let's say, the human being from going into a wild state and tearing everything apart. They preserve the world and they interfere as little as possible out of respect. So in that sense, good worship of Devata also. But, of course, we can't just go by instinct or whatever. We go by Scripture. And Scripture tells us above the Devatas, and there's the Supreme Lord. And the Supreme Lord is there to get us beyond the whole material conception. So that's what distinguishes Supreme Lord from the Devatas. Worship the Supreme Lord, and then we get out of the material world, we get out of our material conception, and we enter into the spiritual world. So therefore, worship of the Devata is important for the lower people in society. At least they give higher respect to higher entities and helps them keep control of their senses. And then we have respect for Supreme Lord, which takes us beyond the material world completely. So that is the ultimate goal of this whole system set up by the king, the Varnashram system. And if that's absent, then the whole system falls apart. So therefore the Deva, as mentioned in this verse, is also important. So the king has an obligation, a duty to inculcate worship of the Lord within society. But all people are not devotees, so they will give respect, but they're not going to devote themselves to that worship. Others will devote themselves fully to the worship of the Lord. So those are called the Vaishnavas, or devotees. So there's opportunity for both. You can worship the Devatas, or you can worship the Supreme Lord somewhat, or you can worship the Lord fully. And of course, to worship the Lord fully as a Vaishnava or devotee, that is the best, because we're concentrating on the spiritual aspect of everything. So we're rising above the Varnashram system. So the Varnashram system is to get us up to that level where we can start worshiping the Lord and respecting him nicely. We have a Vaishnava, and then we forget about the other system, and we start worshiping the Lord in a concentrated way. The whole principle of the system is that it works because the Lord is involved. And if there's no Lord there as the ultimate purpose, the system falls apart. Which means that human society cannot function properly unless there is a spiritual center, or spiritual core. It has to be somewhere in there. It may be indirect for some people, nevertheless it has to be there. If it's not there, whole society will start falling apart eventually. It will last for a few years, or 100 years, or 200 years, or whatever, then it will crumble away. Another society will rise up, it will crumble away again. So we have to have that connection with the Supreme Lord within that society. Then the Varnashram system works properly, and then society goes on. So the Lord provides that arrangement. He supplies the manus, he empowers these special human beings to start dynasties, to rule over the human population, and produce a system of Varnashram, and give the connection with the Supreme Lord also, and set up this whole system that society can go on. Unfortunately, we also have time influencing, so we get Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali going on. And as we go on, things get worse and worse, and the whole system of governance becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and then it has to go back to Sattva again and start all over. So we have cycles and things like that going on. And in the present case, we have Parikshit just on the borderline here with Kali Yuga entering in, just beginning to enter in. And he gets involved in this whole incident where he insults the breast to disappear and die, whatever, let him give up his body, whatever, and finish his rule. And then Kali Yuga can take over more. So he's involved in this whole incident, but nevertheless, he perseveres as a great devotee of the Lord, and as a king also, and acts in a very proper way. So he does not counteract, as Prabhupada mentioned previously, he doesn't counteract the Brahmana's son's curse at all. Here he regrets his action, and he regrets that he had somehow offended the Brahminical community and the Brahmana. So therefore, he said, okay, let me pay the result of my bad act by taking away my kingdom, taking away everything. So that we can say it's an ideal act in one sense of the king. And as a devotee, of course, we know that the devotee is not attached to material things. He's not attached to his material body or material identification. All he wants is to maintain his devotional relationship with the Supreme Lord. That's most important. So it's natural for the devotee to not be too much interested in the curse or whatever happens. Okay, any questions?
the ghee.
Ghee.
There's no sacrifice.
Yes.
So what's the point? There's no sacrifice and everybody's become vegan.
Very, very difficult to have ghee. Well, then we could do Nam Sankirtan. We don't need ghee for that. That's why we have Nam Sankirtan. That's the sacrifice. Anyway, we can't really do those sacrifices because we don't have the qualified brahmanas. So therefore, that doesn't work too well because very, very difficult to get qualified brahmanas to pronounce the mantras properly, etc., etc. So, but we can do the other sacrifice, that is Nam Sankirtan.
But we can use the ghee in sacrifice in making prasada.
Yeah, you can still. Yeah. Of course, feeding the brahmanas is also considered to be a very, very wonderful act. Satisfy the brahmanas with plenty of ghee. So that's better than doing sacrifices in one sense.
Because I've noticed one thing is that when people become vegan, then after 10, 20 years, they really have health issues because they don't take dairy.
Yeah.
I know one lady, she's 15, 20 years, yoga teacher, living really a healthy life, and fully vegan.
Yeah.
Now she's in a wheelchair because the lack of vitamin B12, all that kind of stuff. Which, if they were taking ghee on a regular basis, I don't think it would happen because the ghee feeds
it has vitamin B?
Yeah, well,
B12?
And he has certain components to keep healthy as well.
Yeah.
So not just for sacrifice, but it's just a lot of things.
Yeah, well, as I said, the milk products are good for your health and they nourish the body. Of course, it's not that we have to go extreme. Probably what happened in America, they started emphasizing a lot on more protein, so then more meat, more milk products, etc. And maybe it went extreme in that direction, and therefore people got unhealthy because of that. So therefore, the vegans say we don't want, get rid of everything. Of course, then there's the other argument that it's not the proper cow milk anyway, because it's the wrong cows, and the ghee's not made in the proper way, by the proper process of cooking it properly. So there's arguments both ways.
You never read where the offering is. The statement is that the offerings are made using ghee. You don't read that they're made using olive oil, coconut oil. So we indicate that the devas, because you're making an offering to the devas or Vishnu, they like ghee. And there is another statement in Shastra that something's not considered cooked unless it's cooked in ghee.
Not
coconut oil. Of course, one can use other oil, but that shows, isn't it, the importance of the ghee, especially in the
it's actually very sacred. It's a sacred element in one sense. Of course, it is rather mystical in one sense because it doesn't decay. It remains forever, kind of thing. It's a very, very interesting substance.
Just on that note, there's that pastime of a Vasi that was going to marry that worldly king, and one of the conditions was that everything had to be cooked in ghee. Remember that? Like it's just a point of interest. My question, well, you already asked my question. I was wondering about the ghee and jagger for this sage, being the Harinam. So I got asked a question by one of the Catholic servants the other day that we are chanting Hare Krishna performing the jagger. Why isn't Krishna giving rain to his cows, and why is he allowing his cows to be hungry on this farm?
Well, you mean because there's no rain, there's no grass, and therefore well, I guess we have to use our intelligence also, but that it's not just here. It's maybe we could say the whole country. So next door we have other cows, but what do they do to them? They're slaughtering them right down the road here. They're using them for beef, so it's like a mixture of things. So it's not just this particular area where the devotees are, but it's the whole environment, and then that will cause lack of rain and whatever also. So it's not just the one community.
I'm just thinking in regard to, you mentioned about the milk developing, and Prabhupada said developing the finer brain tissues, that enables us, that helps to understand spiritual subjects.
Yeah.
But generally when you read about milk, of course you also said about taking excessive is another thing.
Yeah.
But when you read about the benefits of milk, generally from outside, it's mainly the calcium,
Protein,
the bones, and it's very good for regenerating the tissue. I was just wondering if you read anything specific about. I mean, Prabhupada says it. I don't know where he's quoting it from, but he says the finer brain tissue, especially. Have you actually read that?
I think there is, and one Upanishad that mentions that, how it nourishes the brain. Yeah.
Because when you read the outside, from outside people, the benefits of milk, and there's a whole list.
It's physical,
Yeah, but it doesn't mention so much about brain.
Yeah.
Anyway, one Upanishad.
I have a practical experience with this.
Yeah.
Because I'm not very intelligent, but my mother used to take me to the dairy every day when I was a kid. I drank milk my whole youth. Then I joined.
It wasn't the milk or something else.
Just on the brain, good marriage is a whole team of people that are researching at the moment. The book he's working on at the moment, good marriage, how the connection between milk and nourishing the brain.
Okay.
He's doing a lot of research on that. He's got quite a few experts based around the world that help him. He wants to put a book out, a comprehensive book on the benefits of drinking milk, specifically for the brain.
In India, someone did some research about sacrifices, and of course, you can't really prove it or whatever like that. But then they said one of the effects of sacrifices is the smoke protects you from radiation, nuclear radiation or something like that. From the sacrifices.
I said the smoke is good, right?
Purifying.
22nd Avenue, you said keep the windows shut.
Purifying. But I think in what is it? In some countries of the world, they started like Europe. I think they got absorbed in fire sacrifices. The Vedic Homa. So they buy these kundas and they start doing little sacrifices because it purifies the atmosphere or something. So they have these persons in Poland or Hungary or something doing little sacrifices all the time because that purifies the place or whatever. So, in other words, we have Vedic statements and Vedic customs, and we don't quite know why they do them or whatever, but they do have some sort of basis, even physically speaking, what to speak spiritually, but you can't always prove it, But nevertheless, it's based on, experience plus the Word of God, so therefore, if we do it, we can't go wrong.
I think Shetty Maharaj wrote a book on cow protection specifically to academia, I think.
Oh, okay.
Did you hear about that?
Oh, I didn't hear about
I
it.
understand he was talking about it in Europe.
But of course, the other thing is, environmentally speaking, instead of using the cows for slaughter, etc., which if you do that, then I think it's a whole ecological problem because you have to use so much land to support the cows, and then you have to cut down the forest and whatever like that. Then you get contamination problems with the wastage and whatever like this. So it actually kind of, if you're just raising cattle for slaughter for the whole earth to get their protein, it's not a very intelligent thing to do for the environment of the world. Ultimately, we can destroy the world just based on that. And then if we start having people fast at least, 2 days a week from meat, that would improve the whole ecology of the whole world by so much, because it would reduce so much the problem of the animal killing, etc. But then of course we have economic forces that we're trying to sell meat and whatever, so it's very difficult to control that. Okay. Hare Krishna.